And welcome back. Thanks so much for staying with Morning Live. Now, Eskom's cost structure is higher than its revenue generation. And of course, this was revealed yesterday. And the government, through Minister Pravin Gordhan, yesterday actually spoke about the roadmap that we will be embarking on to actually fix Eskom. Now, the paper has generated mixed views, as you can imagine. And Eskom is more than 400 billion rand in the red, and this is something, of course, that needs to be addressed speedily. So to discuss this further with us, we are joined by Chris Yelland, Managing Director of Energize Magazine and General Secretary of SAFTU, Mr. Zwelinzima Vavi. Thanks so much, gentlemen, for joining us.
Thank you very much for having us.
Let's start by talking to the plan, the roadmap. Do we have a plan, Chris?
Well, it's a broad roadmap, kind of indicating where we are at the moment, which is problematic, and where we should be heading in the future. So it paints the picture of a more liberalized electricity sector with an independent transmission grid operator and a competitive generation sector. Not a lot of detail, unfortunately, about the distribution sector. But with all plans in South Africa, we sometimes tend to want to settle every single detail before we start. And unfortunately, that's not possible. I think we're going to have to start now, and we're going to have to deal with a lot of questions while we're on the road. On the road to where this plan points us, but perhaps adapting the plan as we go. There is no time now to argue about this for the next 1 or 2 years. We have to make a start on this plan and get this journey underway.
So, Zwelinzima Vavi, your view on the roadmap?
We have to discuss this holistically, including considering properly what are we trying to fix at Eskom. Let's remind ourselves, Eskom is an institution that was created by the colonial state to serve the interest of a tiny minority of an oppressing white minority. It was the best electricity generating company in the world over a number of years. It provided the cheapest electricity that gave South Africa's manufacturing sector such a competitive edge globally. It was best run. It was something that any South African would be proud of. So when we put together a new roadmap, we must consider and do a proper diagnosis as to then what went wrong. Eskom today is in debt of a 450 billion to 500 billion rands. There is no diagnosis as to how we arrived in that situation. The prices of electricity have accelerated to 500% over the period of 11 years
Correct.
or more. Unheard of in the history of the world. We have now become a country with much more expensive electricity. That competitive edge we used to have is gone. What we expected from the government, Chris, is a government that will say, this is where things went wrong. This is our analysis as to how we found ourselves, or we find ourselves in this situation in terms of the debt. And these are the people that we own. This is the amount of money we own to the provident and pension funds. This is the loans that we have made to the World Bank and the IMF. And this is the loans that we have made. And this is our plan to address the crisis of a debt.
So
the second point that I think is very critical. Before you get
there, in other words, you're saying we need to have accountability before we can even move on.
You have to take the country to confidence. If you want us to move into another roadmap, tell us what went wrong. And take responsibility. Account to the public that we unfortunately found the most deplorable people. We have no skills, we have no experience, and we planted them there to collapse a world-leading company and made it
Let me bring you
zero.
in here, Chris, because Mr. Vavi makes a good point, because there has to be accountability if you're looking at a situation whereby Eskom as an entity, it constitutes 15% of the country's GDP in its debt. So there has to be accountability for that. And this is an entity that has over the years had boards of directors, it has had executive management. So how did it get here?
You see, we can dwell on the past and we can dream about the past, the illustrious past of Eskom. But the world has changed. Eskom was set up 90 years ago as a vertically integrated monopoly. The world has changed and Eskom has not changed with it. It is still structures as it was in the apartheid era, and it's no longer fit for purpose. It is no longer responsive to the market. Talking about accountability, the best way to increase the accountability of Eskom is to increase the public participation in the business of Eskom. Not privatization, but public ownership. And here I'm talking about increasing the number of shareholders. At the moment we have one shareholder, the state, and they play with taxpayers' money, and they are unaccountable. What we need is pension funds, banks, financial institutions, development financial institutions, the DBSA, the African Development Bank, all these institutions that can come to the table bringing skills, management expertise and accountability. It is only by having multiple shareholders where people are actually, not people, where public institutions are invested in this business, then it becomes accountable, because then they're not playing with just other people's money, they're playing with their own money.
Hasn't our money as the public already been invested in Eskom? We're talking about this debt that needs to be serviced. Who's servicing that debt?
The taxpayer is servicing it, and the government is not accountable. That is the problem. We need more public ownership of Eskom, public institutions.
Okay, but before we get to that point, because we heard yesterday through that plan that there will be an unbundling of Eskom, and as such that monopoly will be broken. But what about the monies that have already been lost? If someone can walk in and walk off with R1 billion out of Eskom, why aren't we asking who took what and why aren't they bringing it back?
I think we are asking that question, and it's in the hands of the national prosecuting authorities and the police to bring people to justice. Eskom has got to get on with its business. If Eskom is obsessed with the past, and I'm not saying we shouldn't look at this money that has been stolen, but Eskom's task is the future of South Africa, and it has to deal with its problems and get on with the future. This plan, I believe, whilst it may not suit everybody, and no plan will ever suit everybody, we need to make a start. And we need to get going. If we start talking about this for another 2 years, we're talking about a collapsed economy.
You see, this, Chris, confirms every fear we have about this plan. You have just outlined it to the South Africans to hear. The reason why you don't want to dwell in the past and you want us to talk to the future is because the future of this plan will serve a particular class interest, the interest of the rich, the powerful in society who can afford to participate in the so-called public ownership that is referring to. The ordinary people who don't have electricity, the working class who are too poor will not participate in the so-called new partnership and new public ownership because they just don't have money to buy into private shares. The only way they can participate will be through their
pension
funds, pension funds,
public institutions.
Hold on, their pension funds already makes 90 billion rands of that 450 to 500 billion rands debt as we speak. That's the only way they can participate. But the people who owns the means of production, the people who owns everything moving in the economy will be able to participate in this public ownership. This is a road, we believe, despite all of the minister's assurances, this breaking up of Eskom is to prepare it for its eventual privatization along the lines of what Chris is saying is the future.
Whilst
and this is what we are dead against.
I hear your concerns, but at the same time, what we have at the moment is Eskom generating 95% of this country's electricity supply and not doing a good job as things stand at the moment.
All of a sudden, as a result,
it cannot be business as usual at Eskom. So
no, it can be.
How do we address that situation?
Get the leadership to account. Get people in prison. Get the thieves that looted Eskom and left the country back and prosecute them. Get rid of a government that have allowed a 450 to 500 billion rands debt. That's accountability in any society. Believe me, anywhere else in the world, if we were to mention that there is a public institution in debt to the tune of 450, 500 billion rands, that government will not see the light of the day the next day. If there was to be any statistics that you would have read yesterday in terms of what is happening to our unemployment, that government, there would be a civil war. I mean, 47% of your likes, the African women, unemployed. 58% of our young people unemployed. 38.5%. This is what this thing is leading us to. This is breaking up of Eskom. This is about bringing in the private institutions. Already they are here. We have signed 27 agreements with the IPPs, and they are already giving a monopoly to the exclusion of Eskom. They are the ones that are generating renewables. Guess what? They're getting every of what we need to provide renewables from outside. They are not creating jobs here. They are milking Eskom dry as we speak. They have been given a 20 years period to make profits at the expense of the public institution. This is the road into justifying and legitimizing that stealing of from the public sector by the private sector parasites coming from all over the world. And this is what we are rejecting all together. You can't break up an institution and do not provide the necessary explanation as to why you are breaking it up. You can't say it's about competition. We want competition. Everybody says, oh, that's nice. Competition of between who and who is the essential question that the minister is not talking to us.
You know, we can talk about ideology.
Which is what we are doing, by the way.
This
is exactly what you are doing. You are speaking ideology, but you want to say my point of views are ideological, not yours.
I've heard a lot about the problems, and that cannot be denied. I have not heard a lot about the solutions. And the solutions have been on the table with government, with labor, with communities, and with the political institutions of South Africa, the political institutions of government. Since 1998, we've had a plan on the table which talks to the need to restructure the electricity supply industry. And since 1998, we have done nothing. We are still trapped in the past with the same problems of the past, trying to grapple with the world that has changed. And it's time that we put aside these differences and start moving forward with solutions instead of talking about the past and the glorious past of Eskom. It is no longer fit for purpose.
Okay, tell you what we're going to do. We are coming into news time. So the unbundling of Eskom, generation, transmission, distribution. Which parts of that are the profit-making parts, if there is such a thing at Eskom? Where are we seeing money at Eskom? And which are the loss-making parts of Eskom? And how are we going to deal with this unbundling process with that in mind? If you two gentlemen don't mind, if you would stay on, I would love for us to go to news and then come back and pick up this and talk about what is actually going on, because Eskom's problems are not only financial, there are governance issues as well, there are operational issues as well, and all of that needs to be addressed. So please stay with us. We're going to go to news with Leanne, and then we'll come back and continue this discussion about the roadmap that was unveiled yesterday by Minister Pravin Gordhan to essentially fix Eskom's problems. But right now it's 7 o'clock. Leanne standing by with the news.